Erich von Däniken was one of the first to actually do aerial flyovers of the Nazca region and was one of the first researchers to not only look at the diagrams on the plain floor, but also in the hills of Nazca, we find intricate mathematical diagrams that have never been documented before.
When you fly over the desert, you see down gigantic lines. Seen from the air, they give you the imagination of airstrips because they start abruptly, end abruptly, sometimes they cross. They look like airstrips.
Welcome to the Capitals Uncovered. Martin Sieff and Pelle Taylor. We're talking about the news. We have interesting guests, and it's very, very exciting to be on top of everything that's going on in the world. But sometimes, occasionally, we just we allow ourselves to step out of the news cycle. And although it's only 12 days in January so far, and America's gone into kind of supernova mode. I mean, Trump, the former reality TV show participant or host or organizer, certainly knows how to keep the world on its toes, and fighting all these boss fights as well. He's the European Union. The latest I heard was the French, the British, and the Germans were going to send ships to Greenland to challenge Trump. We'll see what X says in the next few days. But anyway, we won't. That's the last we're going to say about contemporary events right now, because Martin and I are going to discuss Erich von Däniken, who is a sort of a writer and explorer and investigator who was very well known in the 1960s and 70s, and he died aged 90, I think yesterday or the day before. And he was hugely influential because I'll just give a very, very quick tour d'horizon of his ideas. I mean, his basic idea was that the pyramids and those Nazca lines in Peru couldn't have been, and a few other things, couldn't have been done by, early peoples, but rather alien civilizations came from thousands of years ago and introduced modern technology to, let's say, the ancient Egyptians to allow them to build the pyramids, because the pyramids are, if you look at the Pyramid of Giza, it's incredible. I mean, it's lined up in a particular geographical way that couldn't have been done, without a modern advanced compass type technology. And then there's always this question of how did they move so many rocks there, or how many of these blocks, which hundreds of men needed to push on logs or whatever, and then they had to lift them. I mean, somebody worked out that even if you lifted one block in place every 10 seconds, it would still take 1,000 years. I mean, you can Google it, but it's quite incredible. Well, if they were taking advantage of alien technology, the aliens came and left, then that explains it. And there's the other thing is that a lot of the early some statues and sort of ornaments and pictures and inscriptions and so on have these in early Indian cultures and Peruvian cultures. These people look like astronauts, and some of them look as if they're flying on spaceships. And that would have been beyond the imagination of early man unless he'd seen that himself. So the idea is that these aliens turned up with their spaceships. They were the early artists of these primitive cultures decided to depict them, and then they went away again. And we're left with these mysteries. And Erich von Däniken popularized this. He had a period of great fame in the 60s and 70s. He was the explorer and geographer, if you like, or the meta-historian of the age of Aquarius. I mean, the 70s was very much a period of that kind of astrology fascination. Then he fell out of favor. And then he came back in the 1990s and has said, if you go onto the sort of various Discovery channels and YouTube channels devoted to things that are not quite politically correct, if you like, or not quite kosher, he's still a popular presence there. Martin, you've you've been a fan of Erich von Däniken for a long time, even though you were surprised when I said he just died. I guess he's probably one of those people you think lived forever. Tell us
Yes.
how you came onto him and what you think and what evidence you would support adduce to say that he's on the right track or whatever. What do you think?
Well, first of all, Pele, a dangerous question to ask me, because if you don't shut me down, I talk on it for happily for 6 hours. I'm not an original on it. There are thousands of people who are first-class popularizers, teachers, scholars, original researchers. They're all over the internet, of course. Their books are all over the world. And that is really the significance of Herr von Däniken. I first came across his work when it came out because it swept the world. And again, it reflects my age. I was a teenager in the 1960s. I was lower middle class, which meant that while I lived in relatively modest circumstances. I was comfortable. We never went abroad for holidays. We had a black and white 12-inch television TV set, which my parents stirringly upgraded to 17 inches. My mum objected to it at the time in the mid 1960s. But through the Butler Education Act of 1944, I had a wonderful education at one of the best grammar schools, thankfully still surviving in the United Kingdom at the time, Belfast Royal Academy, equivalent to me of what Westminster was to you. So I was a bright kid, and the world was my oyster, at least on the television screen. And when Daniken's book came out, I and several of my closest friends, we loved science fiction. And we loved it because this was beyond science fiction. And this is the key to von Daniken. He's a much greater figure than the so-called mainstream will admit to this day. He's a prophetic figure. He changed the consciousness of the Western world. Today, the idea that there is intelligent life on other worlds or up in somewhere in the galaxy or beyond the galaxy is taken for granted. The idea that flying saucers may be real and may be from other worlds. Well, if you read The Guardian and you listen only to the BBC, then you're a supreme intellectual and nobody can teach you anything, and you know you're superior. You're the most superior intelligent force in the universe. And as Nietzsche and as Dostoevsky pointed out, since you have gotten rid of that pesky Judeo-Christian God and Muslim God too, if you're a liberal secularist, that means the intellectuals on BBC talk programs are the lords of creation. Well, no, assholes, you're not. We don't know what's out there. Von Daniken actually taught us humility.
Martin, you were just saying about Erich von Däniken that he opened up the kind of understanding and made us humble. I mean, it's very likely that there's alien life out there, and whether it's actually arrived or not. I mean, there's an increasing amount of evidence, even in the mainstream media, but especially on shows like the Joe Rogan show. There's a guy called Fravor, I think, who's a Navy pilot. Navy pilots are very sort of logical, down to earth people, sort of chillingly square and straight, and he was an engineer by training, and engineers are very, very skeptical. And the description he gave of what was an identified flying object in the true sense of the word, that is, we don't know what it was, really kind of convinced me. I mean, I'm the arch skeptic of these things, that maybe there's something to it. I mean, it's got to be something. Is it a secret weapon? Is it an illusion that you get when you're flying at high altitude? Is it a UFO? Or is it a giant psyops where this guy is in on it to convince us all that there's something going on? Anyway, that's a kind of by the by. We might get into that a little bit later. But you were just saying, what does Erich von Däniken, how did he change our consciousness? Pick up on that thread and carry on.
He changed the way the whole world looks at its own past and at the universe. I would say his change is as massive as that of Martin Luther, who created the Protestant Reformation. Now, this is a huge thing to say, but his books have sold in the scores of millions. To this day, there is a hugely popular television show. It's probably runs in Germany and Europe as well on different outlets called an American show called Ancient Aliens on the History Channel here, which is watched by at least hundreds of thousands of people, possibly millions. But it has been going now for 15 years or more, I think since 2009. I stand to be corrected on that. And the people who they have on are serious people, both in terms of researching of this, but also they bring people together. The people who believe that this happened are enormous. They've had astronauts like Edgar Mitchell, the sixth man to walk on the moon, on here. You have the former Canadian Minister of National Defense, who died a few years ago. And he repeatedly went on the record. He could not say it on American or British television, but he said it in Russian television. And remember, this is the guy who defended Canada from the Soviets under NATO. There's no question about his integrity or his seriousness. The head of the Israeli space program, the man who put Israel's satellites in space, openly talked about this several years ago, that aliens are among us, and all the world leaders, including President Trump, know about it. The former president and prime minister of Russia, Dmitry Medvedev, said this when he thought maybe he didn't think he was offline. Medvedev is often presented in the West either as a liberal, which and pro friend of Obama's, which he really was not, or as a lightweight buffoon, which also he has never been. He's a very serious man. He was President Vladimir Putin, remains one of President Vladimir Putin's closest friends, advisors, and lieutenants, and he's been prime minister and president of Russia. And you can look him up on YouTube. He's on the record as saying the Russian president always carries two sets of documents with him at all times. One is, of course, the equivalent of the American football, the launch codes for emergency nuclear war, which everybody knows, but also the secret files on the aliens among us and the negotiations we have with them.
Wow.
You have whistleblowers going in America all the way back to 1947 on this. That there is one conspiracy theory, and it's put very seriously, that the reason President Kennedy, there are other reasons too, that President Kennedy was assassinated, was because he wanted to cooperate with the Soviet Union, not just to end the threat of nuclear war, which is very well documented, but also to share the secrets of American reverse engineering with aliens. There are books of memoirs written by senior American military officers up to the level of colonel and higher before they died. There are saying this, that one of the most eminent national security engineers in American history, the late Ben Rich, who was the second head of the Lockheed Skunk Works, which is the advanced technology at Lockheed Skunk Works is so important that it is rated officially 2 levels above top secret. There is a higher level of security on exotic propulsion systems in the United States than there is on the development of missiles and thermonuclear weapons. What does that tell you? Now, I learned something as a teenager watching the shenanigans about the President Kennedy assassination. And that is this, 2 things. And most people out there are sheep and don't realize this to this day. You can cover up anything, especially in a democratic society. It's easier to cover it up in a democratic society. Because if you're living in Russia and China, most of the population, anybody with wit, as George Orwell realized, knows the government is always lying to them. And the media is always lying to them. But what do you hear in Sweden? And what did we grow up with in Britain? And what did earlier generations in America believe? That the media, that CBS and PBS will always tell you the truth. And the truth will always be out there. And why do people believe this? In Britain, all the intellectuals, I've said before, and we should do a separate program on this at some point, that ludicrous, pathetic, childish fairy tale of a show, which ran for 10 years in Britain, The West Wing, with wonderful actors led by the magnificent Martin Sheen as President Bartlett, the President of the United States. And what is the picture you see there? That American presidents, the American president has a Nobel Prize in economics. No American president has ever won the Nobel Prize for economics. The Nobel Committee made a fool of themselves by giving the Nobel Peace Prize to Barack Obama as soon as he got office and before he did anything and before he unleashed wars and chaos and suffering in places as far apart as Libya and Syria and kept it going in Afghanistan and Iraq. But they gave him a Peace Prize anyway. Now, when it come, nobody ever gave a Nobel Prize or a Pulitzer, of course, to von Däniken because he was a heretic. He said the emperor has no clothes. And was everything he said true? Of course it wasn't. Was he an Isaac Newton, a great physicist? No, of course he wasn't. He never claimed to be. But what von Däniken did was he asked questions. He had had a very good education in a Jesuit school in Switzerland. He was Swiss. And he understood the Socratic method. And he asked questions. And he pointed things out. And as you said, first of all, the physical evidence is there. It isn't just the pyramids. You mentioned the blocks of the pyramids, the difficulty of moving 5 tons stones. But there are, if you go to Baalbek in Lebanon, you have raised megalithic, perfectly worked stones that weigh more than 1,000 tons, lifted well off the ground and 20 or 30 miles from the quarry where they were brought from. Wooden rollers would not work for them. They would crush any wooden rollers. For that matter, the 30-ton monoliths on Easter Island would crush any wooden rollers. Wooden rollers do not work. And from Baalbek to Stonehenge, to Easter Island, you also have the same weird local folklore. It's always consistent. It's always the same. Sounds were made and people played tunes and the stones floated through the air and people danced in front of them. Now, of course, that's absurd. It's beyond our physics. It actually isn't beyond our physics. Our physics is moving towards studies that sonic technology can apparently, in at least very tiny conditions, negate gravity as we understand gravity to be. We simply don't know. We've only had modern physics and science for 150 years. We've only known X-rays exist for 100 years. Nikola Tesla, who gave us our electronic technology, was the first ancient aliens theorist. And von Däniken talked about this all the time. Tesla was regarded as a crank and a crackpot because he claimed he was receiving intelligent messages from people in outer space. Yeah. In 1954, Major Donald Keyhoe, one of the first and most meticulous of researchers on this, on American television, spoke about this. And he was actually silenced on network television. You can find it online. He's talking about this, and the signal is blotted out on the network just when he's getting into the subject. We are scratching the surface on this. And there
Tesla, of course, is the Croatian scientist. After which, after whom the electronic car is named. Just a little fact.
Oh, he's more than that. Yeah. He is why you and I are talking to each other. Right. He's the founder of radio technology rather than Marconi. The U.S. Supreme Court acknowledged in 1943, only after he was safely dead, of course, that his work, Marconi stole and parroted Tesla's work. But Tesla is on record. He created the whole technology of alternating current. Edison's famous electric current, which Edison is, of course, still regarded as the great hero of, for electric lights and everything else. Under Edison's system, you only had direct current, which loses power after a few miles, and you would have had to have a major electrical generating station, literally only 400 yards to a couple of miles from each other in every city. You would have to have had hundreds of thousands of them, hundreds of thousands in every major country. It would have been insane. Electricity would have been limited to a few gadgets and to lighting
Anyway,
and
sorry, you're saying
nothing
about
else.
Tesla. He received secret messages from alien civilizations, but
Oh,
just,
yes, absolutely. He was open about it. But the point is, this is not a crackpot. This is a much more important man than Einstein.
right,
Much
yeah.
more important. A whole electrical technology comes from Tesla. All of it. But it primarily comes through the use of the transformer to flip electrical current from positive to negative and back again at transformer points throughout the system. And that renews the power of current. I actually like to say that Hegel's philosophy of thesis of an antithesis, coming and each dominant idea creates its own counterforce and what have you, is really the principles of electricity, the basic principles of the universe in action in an intellectual and spiritual and philosophical dimension, which is
Sorry
why
to
Hegel
interrupt.
was so
Yeah,
important. But the point is, Tesla believed in all of this. And it's not just Tesla. We had a president of Russia on the record talking about this.
yeah.
They had the Israeli space program on this. Prince Philip in Britain all his life was a passionate believer in all of this. And there are senior officers in the Royal Air Force he worked with who testified to this, even while he was alive. And
Sorry, Martin, I got to
all
interrupt.
the major defense
Yeah,
establishments believe in this.
and Däniken, who died, was the popularizer of the fact that they'd
Yes,
arrived
it doesn't start with
centuries or thousands of
Däniken.
years ago, which explained why these primitive cultures, as it were, had what looked like spacemen and what on their temples, inscriptions and what do you call them, reliefs,
Yes, and
and
it's in Renaissance art as
these
well.
incredible structures that we still have on Earth, the Nazca Lines, which is an ancient runway or a monument to an ancient runway that the
No, we
primitives.
know what they are. They're not a runway. If you land in any kind of a major aircraft or spacecraft on the Nazca Lines, the soil is loose, it's perfectly routine, and anything would sink into it. They are not landing. We know what they are. They
Right.
point to Tiahuanaco and Pumapunku, which are the main ancient megalithic sites, top of the Andes Mountains. They have perfectly worked stone blocks that are perfectly worked stone blocks. They were destroyed by some kind of geological or tidal wave catastrophe, even though they're at the top of the Andes Mountains. We know this is a fact because the top of the Andes Mountains have trillions of seashells and tiny sea animals that were deposited there. The top of the Andes Mountains, sometime in the ancient past, were at the bottom of the ocean. But now, of course, thousands of feet up. But when you go to Tiahuanaco and Pumapunku, you have this human-made engineering, which some estimates are 10 to 15,000 years old. For reasons I can very specifically argue, I think the estimate should be a lot lower than that. It should have been back to the Bronze Age, which is still ancient and early enough. But again, there isn't, as von Däniken himself pointed out and others, they don't even have wooden rollers, trees at that level there to make rollers. And if you made the rollers, having worked stone blocks, megalithic blocks that are 30 to 100 tons in size, would simply crush the wood. It wouldn't work. So we simply do not know how they are made with any of our accepted parameters of technology. We simply do not know. But what von Däniken did was he did not create this idea. He popularized it. He went to the early material. He went to these extraordinary pictures like an ancient Maya king, clearly riding. And look at it's one of the most famous, von Däniken made it one of the most famous pictures and images in the world. You have an ancient Maya king riding what appears to be either a rocket-powered motorcycle or crouching and controlling all the controls in a small space capsule. In Europe, you have a medieval monastery in Kosovo where they show Sputniks, where it's a painting about the birth of Christ. And between the traditional angels up in the sky, you also have two Sputniks, and they look exactly like Sputnik 1 and Sputnik 2 did, with the same ailerons, aerials streaming, three or four of them streaming behind them, and they're obviously in the heavens, and they're each piloted by a human being or somebody who looks like a human being. And this was in the 14th century, and it's not in isolation. Studies have been done on this. You'll find it on the internet. There are flying saucers found in paintings of the Annunciation of Christ. They're woven into traditional Christian pictures by the great Renaissance artists, but they're clearly what we now call flying saucers, and they're emitting beams of light down to the earth. This is weird stuff. But it's much more basic than that. In 1940, we have Roswell, now a very famous story in 1947. We have hundreds of occasions of this. You can find on the internet confessions from people who said they served in United States Army top secret retrieval units that specialized in retrieving advanced technology from flying saucer crash sites from as early as the 1950s to the present. This is all on record. It's all on record. Much of it is from highly credible people. There was a very famous case of the Japan Airlines 747 that flew to Anchorage, Alaska in 1986. And a gigantic aircraft, a very gigantic aircraft, played games with it. The quote-unquote aircraft was, according to the pilot, who was a veteran, respected pilot of Japan Airlines, one of the most respected people they had, and to his crew, 4 times larger than a United States aircraft carrier. And it's in space. And it's flying in the stratosphere, and it terrifies the crew of a 747, and it's recorded on radar. And there are many such occasions. Look at the story of the Phoenix Lights, which was seen by thousands of people in the city of Phoenix in 1997. And Governor Symington of Arizona at the time tries to make a joke of it. He gets a guy dressed as a big alien to come in a press conference with him and take off his false head, so he's really a guy and everybody has a good laugh. But this is a deliberate attempt to avoid panic and damp down on dangerous speculation. Somebody is playing with us, and it could be some of our own people too, because much of this advanced technology, according to alleged whistleblowers, has actually been developed by the United States and other countries. But we keep it secret from our own publics. They keep it secret theoretically from us.
But I mean, Martin, I got to ask you here. I mean, we've been worrying about World War III, and
I still am.
So I know. So why should we worry about it if there are aliens out there? I mean, are these aliens hostile to us? In which case, World War III is, or are they going to save us from our? I mean, I've heard somewhere that whenever the Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana, which is sort of one of the most important American bases for nuclear delivery, there are often UFOs cruising around there to make sure that we don't loosen a missile by mistake.
Oh, there's more than that. Malmstrom's missiles were artificially activated back in the late 1960s, and after UFO sightings. And the officer who was in charge of the launch programs there, who lived for decades afterwards, and this is all on. You can find chapter and verse for this in 2 or 3 minutes, not even 5 minutes, clicking on YouTube. You'll find the material on this. Just put in Malmstrom and UFO incident on ICBMs. They activated the ICBMs, and the officers in charge could not put them off. And there was panic over this in the Strategic Air Command because they didn't know what was going on, and officially and understandably, they still don't. And the officer in question, decades later, broke his own silence and spoke about this. But the US government, there's documentary evidence on this going back to 1941 in the United States government. The best solid, and it's a really serious book. It's written by a graduate of my own college at Oxford, Exeter College, Oxford, the finest mainstream historian on this, very much in the von Däniken tradition, in the best way. His name is Richard Dolan. And he's written many books on this. He has a strong online presence on YouTube. But start with his classic book, UFOs and the National Security State, an enormous academic study. And Pelle, you're an academic, a professional historian. You've written serious works on revising our understanding, upending our understanding of how World War I began. And what did you do? You went to the official documented record and you found thousands of documents and you did your homework and you quoted chapter and verse. And this is what Richard Dolan does in UFOs and the National Security State. And the entire scholarly apparatus is there.
Mm.
And whenever I've checked out any of his documents, or any of his claims about what happened in Washington, and I was hands-on political correspondent in and around Washington, as you
Mm.
know, for 36 years, it all checks out.
Mm.
It all checks out. He's an honest, honorable, and accurate and reliable man.
Mm.
So what von Däniken was doing was he wasn't creating something new, and he didn't claim to. He was pulling the veil aside and said, look at what's there. Answer the questions I'm asking. There's a strong parallel with Martin Luther nailing his, was it 95 or 97 theses up on the wall at Wittenberg. You know,
Yeah.
it's one of the most heroic moments in Western European and Christian and world history.
Mm.
One man challenging the Orthodox, and he's still a devout Christian, and he wasn't out to create a new faith. He
Mm.
wanted to clean up the Catholic universal Christian faith. At first, he didn't want to splinter it. It wasn't what he planned, but he's asking questions. He's an honest, fearless man who's asking questions. And by doing that, Martin Luther changes the course of human history,
Yeah.
and he also changes the way we think. And von Däniken did that.
Mm. Von Däniken, I mean, he's been given lots of obituaries by usual skeptics. I mean, God, me more than anyone else,
They're ignorant.
else
They don't
knows
know
that
what they're
mainstream
talking
media
about
make
in their
things up and
lives.
they lie and they don't say what's going on. But I know that there's a guy called David Coulthard, and Tucker, he's a New Zealander or an Australian who's done some programs on it. And he's been testifying before the Senate. The Senate have started taking it seriously. And as you said, even the ultra mainstream press have been quoting these hearings. They can't not quote these Senate hearings into the existence of UFOs. Tucker Carlson, who's the world's most popular podcaster, he's been telling tens of millions of his viewers, and Joe Rogan, that UFOs exist. And yet it still hasn't kind of broken through. Although, I mean, we don't need the mainstream media's permission to do so. I mean, if tens of millions of people watch Tucker Carlson and get changed in their views, then you don't have to ask the BBC to report it. But where is this story going next? I mean, do you think President Trump? I mean, for instance, he's teasing a revelation in 10 days' time. I think it's something. I think it's got to do with Obama trying to steal the election of 2016 and 2020 and succeeding in 2020. And I think that's the thing he's been trailing with these videos on Truth Social, kind of thriller-like revelations ahead. But is he going to? I mean, that would be the thing. Trump's instinct for showmanship and his egotism. Or he must have been briefed on this. Is he going to be the man who's going to tell us from a presidential podium about the existence of UFOs?
It's already been done. It was done by President Reagan in 1987 at the United Nations. President Reagan said in 1987 at the United Nations that all our world problems could be solved or would be solved if we faced a threat from outer space and the world had to come together. And he said the United States would join in support of the Soviet Union in friendship in such situations. And Mikhail Gorbachev, who was the leader of the Soviet Union at the time, agreed with President Reagan and said he would certainly do so. In the case of President Trump, we know all about this. Again, look up General Chaim Eshed, Eshed. This man for more than 30 years was the head of the Israeli space program. He put the Israeli space satellites that monitor Iranian nuclear technological developments from space, and that also would serve as early warnings to any attack on Israel, and that also served continually for military reconnaissance, as we and the Soviets and the Chinese and everybody else does now as well. This is one of the most senior figures in the Israeli military establishment. And what did he say publicly on the media? And you'll find it all over YouTube too, 4 or 5 years ago. Not only do these different intelligences exist, there is a galactic federation. The former Minister of National Defense of Canada repeatedly said for a decade until he died, the galactic federation that you see in Star Trek is real. This was the former Canadian Minister of National Defense saying this repeatedly on the record. The Galactic Federation is real. They are in contact with us. There is a prime directive, so they do not get involved with us
Yeah,
directly.
but sorry, Martin. I
No,
got
but
to I got
you,
to say
you asked the
wait.
question. Here are the answers.
So
Eshed explained Trump. He said
okay,
Trump wants to go public. Other world leaders have as well. But you can disbelieve this. Most people do. It's beyond people's imagination. But what General Eshed said was the aliens have told them not to go public.
right.
They have
So
instructed
there's a
them.
not no contact rule among the Galactic Federation, and that's why we
No,
don't know about
there
it.
is a great deal of contact, but it is non-public
Okay.
contact.
And sorry, are these hostile? Are the aliens hostile to us?
Some are, some aren't.
Some
That's
are.
the
Are there different UFO
Of
groups,
course
ethnic
there are.
groups? Okay, I
We
see.
know that there are 100 billion star systems in our galaxy. We know that life, even on organic life, can exist virtually anywhere in all the extremes of temperature and environment we have on Earth. We never stop to think that life not only can, intelligent life can not only flourish on the surface of planets, it can flourish within them. We know that several worlds in our own solar system have major oceans, liquid water, which are capable of maintaining sea life as we have on Earth. We know these things as factual evidence. NASA has confirmed that the water erupting from a geyser on the moon of Saturn has the same amount of salt, the same saline levels as the oceans do on Earth.
Mm,
How can that possibly be unless they come from the same source?
mm,
And whatever source they come from, if they have the same saline contact and they're both at comparable temperatures to be fluid, that means that the kind of life that teems in our oceans could teem in the moons of Saturn and Pluto and other satellite worlds of the solar system. And that's only in our own solar system. So we are only beginning to scratch the surface of the universe, even in our own imagination. We don't know what's out there.
mm,
But we do know our own world is teeming in diverse biotech
mm.
life, and that would automatically make
Martin,
it
sorry,
attractive to other
we got to wind up there. We'll carry on
civilizations.
this incredibly interesting subject, but
Sure.
I don't know how you feel about it. I mean, I read up on UFOs much less than you did, but when I did it last time, I thought, well, if this is true, why the hell do I worry about what's going on in the Reform Party in the UK or the election or the council elections or the midterms? Everything else is uninteresting and trivial compared to UFOs. I have to kind of compartmentalize it and think, well,
Yes.
that's how do you? I mean, you're also at the same time as you're a UFO expert, you're also a very, very sort of perceptive and on the ball political analyst of Washington politics. Why don't you just throw in the towel in Washington politics and focus on the UFOs because it's such a big and important subject that everything else seems trivial?
Well, first of all, because UFOs hasn't kept me living comfortably with my family for the past 40 years. Being a journalist and covering politics does. Secondly, as a direct corollary of that as well, we are human beings. We live in our own societies. I watched three playoff football games in the National Football League yesterday. The last one, which the Patriots won against the underperforming Eagles, was, better to forget. The other two were masterpieces. They were classics. We're human beings. We have our needs, our desires, our interests at a human level. And we have to take care of those as well. Whatever else is going on above and around us,
Mm.
whatever else is going on above and around us. I'm a firm believer, and I believe the evidence supports it, that we've played around with this, possibly future shows, that cryptozoological monsters may still exist in large remote areas of Alaska. The people who actually live there, who know a lot more about it than repulsive little pseudo-academic, arrogant intellectuals who live in their tiny corners of London and New York, and LA and sneer at such ideas. Actually, in California, they don't sneer at such ideas. They're much more open to them, to their
Mm.
enormous credit.
Mm.
But in London, well, this is a program for another time. Why English intellectual life is so sneering
Mm.
and so contemptible. Why they don't believe electrical forces dominate the universe. You know why? Because they don't live where you do up in Sweden. They've
Mm.
never been to Iceland. They don't go to Iceland or northern
Mhm.
Norway. In other words, they don't see the aurora borealis. They
Mm.
don't see the northern lights.
Mm.
If you see the northern lights in person, as you know, it's easy to believe they lead to Valhalla. It's easy to believe in a rainbow bridge because they're breathtaking. They're electrical conditions from the magnetic fields of the Earth. And yet, to this day, most English and American regular mainstream so-called academics bury their heads in the sand. Just as Carl Sagan, who I think knew better but was a lying little shit, sneered at the idea of extraterrestrial life. And he had a very good, slick little phrase for for extraordinary claims, there must be extraordinary evidence. That's more typical lying shit from Sagan, because extraordinary claims require evidence. And the evidence here is there. But when Sagan says extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, he's using an excuse to say it doesn't matter what evidence you will provide. I will sneer at it and say it is extraordinary. Gigantic flying machines that weighed thousands of tons were seen in 1997 by night by hundreds of thousands of people in the city of Phoenix in the United States of America. There is comparable
Martin,
evidence.
sorry, I've got to wind up there because the show's coming to an end. Sorry. So,
sure.
Well, it's fantastic. I mean, you've given a quick tour of this topic, and it's, I mean, when I start thinking about it, and I can't refute you, and it would be very interesting if it were true, although it's like thinking about one's own death. It's always there, and we prefer not to think about it because it's so large, and you might just lie down and never lie down in depression in bed, never get out of bed, and think about those small things that keep us going during the day. Similarly, with UFOs, it's such a big subject that I guess, compartmentalize it, prefer not to think about it, because otherwise all other topics that we cover in journalism seem trivial. But anyway, so Erich von Däniken, I guess that's a good place to check out some of those books. Is The Chariots of the Gods and a couple of others. I guess they're available on Amazon.
UFOs and the National Security State by Richard Dolan. Excellent place to start.
National Security State by Richard Dolan is a very well sourced and reputable book, which draws on academic and telegrams and State Department.
Oh yes,
communication. Great. So you viewers, I don't know how many people. I guess a case of changing one's mind is never a single instance. It's a sort of repeated instance over taken years. It's a process of understanding. I mean, a lot of the beliefs I had when I was 20, I don't hold today, but I didn't change them overnight.
Exactly.
So ditto with UFOs, but maybe this will add a little bit of spice to when people watch and start thinking maybe that the world is different than what they thought it was.